This happened on Christmas Eve when I was 16, and it's something I'll never forget. I live in a small, quiet town in upstate New York where everyone knows everyone and crime is practically non-existent. I always felt safe there, especially during the holidays when the snow would blanket the streets and everyone's homes glowed with cry lights. But that night shattered the illusion of safety. I'd always taken for granted my parents were at a neighbor's Christmas party, and I had decided to stay home. I wasn't much for small talk, and being surrounded by adults sipping wine didn't sound appealing. Besides, I had a bunch of horror movies queued up and planned to spend the night lounging on the couch with popcorn and hot chocolate. It was snowing heavily outside, the kind of snowfall that makes everything quiet. The only sound was the occasional creak of our old house settling in the faint howl of the wind. I turned off most of the lights, leaving the Christmas tree glowing softly in the living room. I loved the way it made everything feel cozy. Around 10 p.m. I paused my movie to grab more popcorn from the kitchen. As I was walking back into the living room, something outside caught my eye. We have this big picture window in our living room that looks out onto the front yard. Normally, it gives a great view of the Christmas decorations, the snow-covered trees, and the road beyond. But that night, I noticed something that made me stop dead in my tracks. There was a man standing at the edge of our yard. At first, I thought maybe he was one of our neighbors or someone walking home, but he wasn't moving. He was just standing there. The snow was falling hard and he was obscured, but I could make out the shape of him, a tall figure wearing a long coat and what looked like a hat. I squinted through the dim light, trying to see him better. He didn't move, he didn't wave, he just stood there facing the house. A cold feeling crept into my stomach. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was lost, maybe he was waiting for someone. But why would he just stand there in the snow? Staring, I closed the blinds. Out of sight, out of mind. I thought I told myself I was being paranoid and tried to go back to my movie, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. My eyes kept drifting back to the window, half expecting to see him still there. After about 15 minutes, I decided to check. I didn't pull the blinds up completely, just peeked through one of the slats. He was closer. He was now standing halfway up the yard, closer to the house, still motionless, still staring. My heart started pounding in my chest. This wasn't normal. I grabbed my phone and texted my mom, "Hey, is anyone supposed to come by the house? There's a guy outside and it's creeping me out." She didn't reply immediately, probably too busy at the party. I told myself to relax and that maybe the man was just someone passing through, but deep down I knew that didn't make sense. I checked the window again. He was closer this time. He was at the edge of the porch. The only thing separating us now was the front door and a thin pane of glass. I could see him more clearly now. His coat was long and black, dusted with snow, and his hat cast a shadow over most of his face, but I could see his mouth. It was stretched into this unnatural smile, too wide, like he was enjoying some sick joke that only he knew. I backed away from the window and locked the front door. My hands were shaking as I checked the back door and all the windows to make sure everything was locked. When I was certain the house was secure, I grabbed a kitchen knife and went into the living room, keeping my phone close. I checked the window again, terrified of what I might see. He was gone. The porch was empty. The yard was empty. He had disappeared. I felt a mix of relief and lingering dread. I kept telling myself that he had probably just moved on, but I couldn't let my guard down. I sat on the couch, clutching the knife and staring at the front door. About 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was my mom. "Sorry, sweetie. No one should be there. Lock the doors just in case. We'll be home soon." I started to type out a reply when I heard it tap, tap, tap. It was faint but clear, someone tapping on the living room window. My blood ran cold. Slowly, I turned my head toward the window. The blinds were still down, but I could see the faint outline of a figure standing right there on the other side of the glass. He was back. The tapping came again, louder this time. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. All I could do was stare at the window where the outline of the man loomed. Then I Heard something even worse. The doorknob rattled. He was trying again. I snapped out of my paralysis and dialed 911 with trembling fingers. The operator answered, and I tried to keep my voice steady as I explained that someone was outside my house trying to get in. She told me to stay on the line and that officers were on their way. The tapping stopped. The doorknob went still for a few minutes. Everything was quiet, except for the sound of my breathing and the operator's calm voice in my ear. I thought maybe he'd left again. Then I heard footsteps. They were slow and deliberate, moving around the side of the house. The police are almost there, the operator assured me. I sat frozen on the couch, gripping the knife so hard my knuckles turned white. I listened as the footsteps moved to the back of the house. Then they stopped. The back door handle rattled. I thought I was going to be sick. I whispered into the phone, "He's at the back door now, please hurry." Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I saw flashing red and blue lights outside. 2 police officers came to the door and I let them in, my whole body shaking. They searched the yard and the surrounding area but didn't find anyone. The snow had covered most of the footprints, but they could see a few leading up to the house. The officer stayed with me until my parents got home. My mom was horrified, hugging me and apologizing over and over for leaving me alone. The police said it was probably someone looking to break in, but that didn't make me feel any better. Burglars don't usually stand in the snow staring into windows. Burglars don't smile. I didn't sleep at all that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that shadowy figure standing on the porch, grinning at me through the window. We never found out who he was. The police never caught anyone, and no similar incidents happened in our neighborhood. But every year when Christmas Eve rolls around, I can't help but stare at the living room window and wonder if he's out there somewhere, watching, waiting. This happened about 5 years ago when I was 22, and it's by far the scariest experience of my life. I was home from college for Christmas break, staying with my parents in the small Midwest town where I grew up. My parents live in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind where people leave their doors unlocked during the day and everyone knows each other's names. It felt safe, peaceful. I think that's why what happened caught me so off guard. My parents were hosting their annual Christmas party that night, a tradition they've had for as long as I can remember. It was always the same friends and family crammed into the house, Christmas music playing on a loop, way too much food, and lots of wine. The party would spill out into the front yard and even the sidewalk when it got too crowded inside. I wasn't feeling very social that year. I'd just gone through a rough breakup, and honestly, I was planning to keep to myself upstairs for most of the night, but my mom guilt tripped me into coming down to help greet guests. It was around 7:00 p.m. when the party was in full swing. I was standing near the entryway, sipping on some spiked cider and trying not to make awkward small talk. That's when I noticed him. A man in a Santa suit was standing in the front yard, just beyond the glow of the Christmas lights. At first I thought he might be part of the party. Maybe my mom had hired someone to surprise the kids with gifts or something. She always went overboard with the Christmas cheer. But as I watched him, I realized he wasn't interacting with anyone. He was just standing there, still as a statue, looking toward the house. I nudged my mom, who was busy chatting with one of the neighbors. "Hey, did you hire a Santa?" I asked. She frowned. "No." Why? I motioned toward the yard, but when I looked back, he was gone. "Hun, never mind, I guess," I muttered, feeling a little uneasy. The rest of the night went on like normal, laughing, drinking, people swapping stories about the year. I tried to forget about the weird Santa guy and even started to relax a little. Around 9:30, I went outside for some fresh air. Most of the party had shifted to the back patio, so the front yard was empty. I was standing on the porch enjoying the silence when I noticed footprints in the snow. They weren't mine. The tracks LED from the sidewalk up to the front of the house, stopping right under the living room window. I felt a shiver. That had nothing to do with the cold. Someone had been standing there watching the party through the window. I looked around, but Didn't see anyone. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I went back inside and locked the front door, something my parents rarely bothered to do. The party started to wind down around midnight, and most of the guests had left by then. My parents were tipsy and laughing as they cleaned up the kitchen while I wandered upstairs to my old room. I figured I'd watch some Netflix until I fell asleep. About an hour later, I was half asleep when I heard something outside. At first, I thought it was just the wind. It had been snowing steadily all night, and sometimes the trees near my window would creak when the wind picked up. But then I heard it again, something heavier, like footsteps crunching in the snow. I sat up in bed, straining to listen. The footsteps were deliberate, moving slowly toward the house. I grabbed my phone and tiptoed to the window, trying to keep myself calm. When I pulled back the curtain just enough to peek outside, my heart nearly stopped. It was him, the man in the Santa suit was standing in the front yard again, staring up at my window. He wasn't moving, just standing there in the same spot as before, his red suit and white beard almost glowing in the dim light from the street lamps. I stepped back from the window, my heart racing. I didn't want to wake my parents. I figured they'd brush it off as someone pulling a prank, but I knew something wasn't right. I texted my best friend. Instead, there's a guy in a Santa suit standing in my front yard. He's been here twice tonight. What do I do? She told me to call the cops as soon as possible. I hesitated. Part of me didn't want to make a big deal out of nothing, but when I glanced back out the window, the man was closer. He was standing at the edge of the porch, his head tilted slightly like he was trying to see inside. My hands were shaking as I dialed 911. The dispatcher answered, and I explained the situation as calmly as I could, trying to keep my voice steady. She told me to stay on the line while she sent an officer to check it out. Is he still there? She asked. I peeked through the curtain again. He was gone. I don't see him anymore, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She told me to stay inside, lock all the doors and windows, and wait for the police. About 15 minutes later, I saw the flashing red and blue lights outside. 2 officers knocked on the door, and I let them in, explaining everything that had happened. They searched the yard and the surrounding streets, but didn't find anyone. They assured me it was probably just a prankster, maybe someone from the party trying to mess with me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was something more. After the cops left, I tried to go back to bed, but I couldn't sleep. I kept imagining that red suit standing in the snow, those dark eyes staring up at my window. Around 3 a.m. I finally drifted off. The next morning, I woke up to my mom calling my name from downstairs. You've got to see this, she said, her voice shaky. I came down to find her standing in the living room staring at the front door. My stomach dropped when I saw what she was pointing at. The doorknob was scratched, deep gouges in the brass like someone had been trying to force it open. My dad opened the door, and we all froze. There were more footprints in the snow leading up to the porch. This time they didn't stop at the window. They circled the house, pausing at every door and window like someone had been checking for a way inside. I called the police again, and they came back to take another look. The officer who showed up was older, rough, and clearly didn't think much of it. He said it was probably just a drunk partygoer who got confused, but then I told him about the Santa suit. His expression changed. He asked me to describe the man in detail, his height, his build, the way he'd been standing in the yard. I told him everything I could remember, and when I was done, he nodded grimly. We've had a few reports like this recently. He said a man dressed as Santa has been spotted around town watching people through their windows. We've been trying to catch him, but he always disappears before we get there. I felt sick. The officer said he'd have patrol cars circle the neighborhood for the next few nights, but there wasn't much else they could do unless he came back. He never did to this day. I have no idea who he was or what he wanted. Maybe he really was just a creepy prankster, or maybe it was something much worse. All I know is that I still get chills every time I see a Santa suit.